Organisational creativity is a big topic, and it begs many questions, like, first of all, whose organisations are we talking about? What do we mean by creativity? What kind of creativity do different organisations require or value, and from whom? How can organisations be designed or structured for creativity? What conditions do you need for creativity to flourish? And what about effectiveness? How do you then harness that creativity to drive better business outcomes? I know it's just scratching the surface, but I'd like to use the next 15 minutes to first flag some of the key drivers of organisational creativity, and then quickly sketch a range of alternative models from an organisation design perspective. Our panel speakers will then do a deeper dive into some of the emerging themes. In thinking about the audience here today, the majority of you work for creative businesses, agencies. Depending how you look at it, creativity is either your product and or a competence or asset that you draw on to make your product. Many of you are lucky enough to work in spaces that are conducive to creativity, and yet paradoxically, some of you succeed because creativity is managed as a separate compartmentalized function rather than something more pervasive in the culture or modus operandi of your organization as a whole. Most of the clients in this room don't work for businesses that would be regarded as inherently creative. As marketers, however, you are almost certainly seen as more creative than other functions, and probably as the natural stroke official champions of a certain kind of creativity for your organization as a whole. Rightly or wrongly, your creative credentials as marketers within the business may rest on your ability to commission, buy, and onwardly sell the creativity of your agencies rather than the innate creativity of your own marketing team. That said, in a growing number of cases, client companies may in fact be more intrinsically or pervasively creative than the agencies that serve them. This is especially true of newer businesses where innovation has been hardwired by design into business structure, operations, and culture. So viewed this way, it might be helpful to break down organizational creativity into two distinct but related questions. These two questions apply to clients and agencies individually as well as jointly. The answers will depend on what kind of business you work for, what you're formally responsible for, and if you'll forgive the pun, how much agency you have or are willing to take to influence the behavior of others. So if you're a marketer, for example, to what extent does the business look to you for creative leadership? And if so, how good is the business at aligning or supporting your efforts to generate full value from creative investment? If you're an agency, then what should or could being an ideas business actually look like? What if you treated ideas not just as something you produce and sell, but as an organizing principle for the whole of your business? This ties in nicely with the A, the D, and the A of the ADAPT agenda. In terms of alliances, both agencies and clients share a vested interest in effective creativity. As Ian argues, the drive for better, bolder, and ideally longer-term partnerships is based on evidence that they produce better work and thus better commercial returns for both parties. In terms of the D of diversification, to quote Ian again, clients are keen to harness the wider creative skills an agency can bring to their wider commercial issues when we can demonstrate a genuine understanding of their business. So helping agencies innovate as well as helping their clients to innovate is something we, the IPA, want to explore more. And finally, greater agility is required, certainly within agencies, to deal with a real-time, always-on world and to help make the shift from traditional, stepwise, industrial-style processes for manufacturing set-piece creativity towards a capacity for continuous content creation. So while A, D and A are a good place to start, there's a whole bunch of C words to consider too. Creativity, of course, but these four, to name a few. I'd like to take them quickly one by one. Let's take commitment. Organizational creativity first requires clear commitment from leadership. The most innovative companies promote innovation or creativity as an explicit organizational value. Together with functional managers, they also specify what commitments they require, formal and informal, from co-workers. This means spelling out what creativity or innovation looks like for different people in the organization and providing boundaries and loops to guide and channel it. Decisions need to be made. Should everyone in the organization be expected to be creative in some way? Or is it actually better to have competent, managed pockets of creativity? There are lots of breathless evangelists for company-wide creativity these days, and examples you'll be all too familiar with, like Google's people being allowed to spend up to 20% of time on their own stuff, or the 20 ways in which Zappos maintains its maverick culture. The problem is that most clients are still working in big matrix-based legacy businesses, built hierarchically and still run by command and control. So the bandwidth for spreading creativity is seriously constrained. And for me, the jury's still out as to the real value of organization-wide creativity anyway. Or at least what I'm saying is we shouldn't just view it as an unconditional good. Witness a feisty board-level discussion we had a few years ago at one of Britain's better-known financial services brands. The ExCo had decided they wanted everyone to be passionate revolutionaries. If you didn't fit the top right-hand box, which they reckoned 40% of their current staff didn't, then you wouldn't be up for the journey. Or in the words of their enlightened HR director, fit in or fuck off. But just how revolutionary did they really want their staff working in treasury, ops, or risk to be? The more nuanced answer we finally settled on was not very. How about context? Some also call it climate or environment. In my business of helping people change things, context is just as important as content. Nothing ever takes place in a vacuum. The same applies to organizational creativity, much of which involves change, be that small incremental improvements to existing products, services, or processes, or more radical disruptive innovation. In short, the more permissive the environment, the greater the potential creative capacity of the organization, and the greater the likely impact or effectiveness of creative endeavor. Paul Feldwick will pick up on this with a look at learning organizations, originally defined by Peter Senge in his book, The Fifth Discipline, as, quotes, an organization where people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, where new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, where collective aspiration is set free, and where people are continually learning to see the whole together. To quote Matisse, creativity takes courage. Courage is arguably the biggest single discriminator between fast-moving, innovative companies and slower, more conservative competitors. Courage is about the willingness to take bigger risks and to learn constructively from failure as opposed to penalize it. This is a real tightrope for most companies. What kind of risk, taken by whom, within what parameters? For example, we're currently working with a large group of distribution and supply chain businesses whose profit performance and customer goodwill depends on flawless delivery of right product, right place, right time. So how do you encourage creativity, aka fresh thinking in this case, among colleagues at any level, while never taking your eye off the operational ball? This means progressive, incremental cultural change, formalizing group-wide behaviors for warehouse and other minimum wage staff along the lines of, don't hold back on a good idea just because you don't have it all worked out. and for leaders like, don't dismiss the unfamiliar just because you can't eliminate all the risk. To many of you, these may sound like statements of the obvious, but for these guys, it's transformational. And finally, collaboration, which also wraps in two other C's, connectivity and conversation. This is about a business's ability to enlist people inside or outside the organization in the generation, dissemination, and implementation of new ideas. Russell Davis and Barry Clark will look at this in a couple of different ways, based on their experiences respectively of the government digital service and of using online platforms for co-creation. But before I hand over to Paul, Barry and Russell, I thought I'd just share some quick back-of-a-fag packet sketches of different organisational models for creativity. I've come up with 6, and there are doubtless more. If so, please share them. Different models have different pros and cons, and there may be some ideas you can pick and mix in the way you think about your own organisation. So here's the first one. This is the classic model which still dominates agency side as well as in client organisations. Here, creativity is compartmentalised, even departmentalised. Creativity is assigned to specific functions, typically innovation or R&D and marketing, and increasingly, one could argue, in digital and data, to the extent that these are separate rather than subordinate. They're the little circles inside the big circle. Other functions, such as internal comms or even OD, or organisation development, may see themselves as working creatively or generating creative output from time to time. However, visions of what creativity looks like can vary wildly between these functions, and underlying commonalities in principle are no guarantees of effective collaboration in practice. Marketing, for example, may well partner more comfortably with totally non-creative functions, such as sales or customer service, in areas like lead generation or customer experience, than marketing can with rather more creative functions, such as corporate comms or internal comms. Anyone here who's been caught in turf wars over who should steer the internal brand and how to do so to the same creative standards of your consumer marketing communication will know exactly what I mean. And as for sibling rivalry between agencies in the same group, let's not go there, at least not today. Pervasive. This is the polar opposite of the localized model. It's more common in new generation businesses and challenger brands, especially digital businesses. Typically, company culture is designed from inception to be inclusive, non-hierarchical, maverick, etc. And this is continuously reinforced through mechanics and rituals that incentivize original thinking, foster cross-functional collaboration, permit qualified risk-taking, and celebrate success. We can all think of examples like Innocent, say, but would you like to guess which company this HR director is talking about? I quote, "Innovation is in our lifeblood. Our role is to unleash the best and the power of all the people that we bring into the organization. We cannot sit back. Innovation is part of everyone's day job, and we strive to create a culture where people have the freedom to fail, learn, and grow." The answer, by the way, is P&G. This is effectively the skunk works model. Essentially, creative people and resources from inside the organization are semi or wholly detached from the organization in order to incubate or accelerate innovation. Often their DNA is spliced with third-party DNA, consultants, for example, to fill key gaps in capability. A piece of trivia for you. The term skunk works originated during World War II when Lockheed Martin spun out the development of their P-80 Shooting Star jet fighter. A closely guarded incubator was set up in a circus next to a plastics factory in Burbank, California, hence the smells. Since then, the term has become generalized to apply to high-priority R&D projects at large organizations, featuring small teams taken out of their normal working environment and given exceptional freedom from their organisation's standard management constraints. The detachment is often physical, as in location, but also cultural, since this model recognises that small bespoke teams, freed from the operational and structural constraints of the parent, will lead to better ideas or faster time to market. However, there are trade-offs. Exporting your most creative talent can have the effect of dumbing down the wider business, and relationships between your stars and lesser mortals can become asymmetrical or disconnected, and that can be a real problem as and when the wider resources of the business are required in order to implement. In a Fast Company article published back in 2000, Jim Collins coined the phrase built to flip. Flippable companies are innovative-driven businesses which are designed not to be built to last, which was Collins's big idea previously, but built to be bought, and rapidly. Countless tech companies have since worked out that it is better to buy an innovation from the outside than to develop it from the inside. This costs the business a lot more in the short term, but it ensures competitiveness and significantly reduces failure rate, since acquisitions are often made once there is proof of concept and critical mass. For example, patent awards, brand reputation, or an installed user base. Examples could be Facebook buying Instagram, HP buying autonomy, or Google buying anything that moves. The scale and ambition for the acquisition can vary, from highly targeted selective investments in order to expand a product portfolio or to enhance functionality, to a deliberate Trojan horse for cultural change in the host company by injecting new talent and working methods into its bloodstream. To be clear, by dropped in, I don't mean standalone. The government digital service arguably fits this model too. To quote from a piece that Russell wrote recently, GDS is 150 people, a mix of developers, designers, writers, policy people, comms people, operations people, all sorts. What you'd get if you took a small government department and added a web development shop and a small creative agency. This is not about a bunch of private sector digital experts parachuting in to save the day, brackets, although we might sometimes behave like that, which is bad. I'm not sure of the metaphor, Russell writes, but we're somewhere between a catalyst, the tip of the iceberg, and in the right place at the right time. This is my fifth model. This is all about direct co-creation with consumers, customers, and users, or for that matter, intermediaries, distribution partners, and other stakeholders. A vast topic in its own right, which Barry will do more justice to than I can. One quick challenge for agencies, though, is whether and how you can participate, or at least eavesdrop on these conversations. Offensively, because you have plenty of value to add, and defensively, because it's not in your interests to be bypassed. And finally, partnership. To bring it all back to agencies and clients and your shared agenda and interests, here's the partnership model, or at its most basic, a customer-supplier model. I've drawn it this way because no matter how close and mutual the relationship may be or feel like, it is structurally at arm's length. Going back to the D of diversification, the final provocation I'd like to leave you is this. Whether and how agencies can move beyond being essentially vendors of creativity to clients to being catalysts for creativity within the client's organization. What more can you do or do differently to help your clients create a more permissive environment and to get better traction for big, potentially transformational ideas? Thank you.